So welcome everybody. Before you all introduce yourself, I want to give some context about this panel. So in my eyes, and this is a personal opinion, the big promise of Ethereum is going to be when it becomes the new financial rails for the world, which means, like it or not, banks, institutions, places with big money. The consumer side, just like in the regular world of B2B or B2C, usually B2B is the more interesting one. That works doubly so when you're talking with pure money. So we need to talk about how do we get banks themselves and big institutions on chain, what is currently blocking that, and how do we get there. So I'll start by letting each one of you introduce yourself. Let's start from Jakub and work our way back.
Thanks. Thanks, Tom. Hi, I'm Jakub. I work for UBS, which is one of the biggest banks in the world, look like headquartered in Switzerland, but we're obviously across the whole world. I had the digital asset risk management practice out of Switzerland, looking really across the whole spectrum of digital asset topics from the angle of risk management, how to build the proper frameworks, capabilities, but also at the core of what I do is look ahead and basically how can we innovate and be part of the community, Ethereum and across crypto community, and really be part of the dialogue. So I'm really happy to be invited here. It's also a good sign that banks can have a discussion on those topics. So looking forward and to this discussion and any discussion afterwards.
Hi, I'm Amzah, work for ABN AMRO, one of the big Dutch banks. I started within risk management, so same sort of background like Jakub. But also I became active in the crypto community, investing in crypto, and after a couple of years I made the switch to innovation department. So we're looking at tokenization, we're looking also starting to look in crypto. So it's all kinds of topics, so stable coins, tokenized money market funds, and our aim is to do as much as possible on public chains.
Hi, I'm Fredrik. I work at the Ethereum Foundation as the protocol security lead. I also co-chair the $1 trillion security initiative that the EF has been working on for a few months now. That's where I met actually all three of you through that project. So yeah, super happy that we started the $1 trillion security project and we're able to kind of get these conversations going.
I'm Arik. I'm the VP of Technology at Fireblocks. We're not a bank and we're not Ethereum. We're sort of the layer in the middle. We provide a lot of different technologies, including custody technology and like technology for payments, tokenization. A lot of the use cases that we, I think as an ecosystem, want the traditional finance to adopt on the blockchain, we're basically helping them do this and we basically believe in a lot of kind of like the same values that come from the blockchain world. So like we provide it in a self-custody for them, right? And then we're probably going to be talking a lot about how it moves forward to other people from that point.
Yeah, I think we have a very varied lineup here. Also, my name is Tom Teman. I'm with the EF, with the account and chain abstraction team, working on the 4337 and EIL, and well, the Trustless conference as well. I do product. So if you don't mind, I actually want to jump right into something which I think is the kind of the interesting take here, which is when I think the big topic here is around privacy. And so do you see the lack of privacy on blockchains as a problem for banks? I assume it is, but like, will you only adopt private networks or privacy preserving networks or even just public ones without privacy? How do you see kind of that adoption working out as we move forward?
I'll try to start. I mean, for me, the first question is what really privacy is, and without probably giving any definition, because I guess everyone has or would have its own definition, right? It's more a matter of choice than really universal privacy. When you apply this, I mean, it's equal along all the users of, let's say, Ethereum, right? And it's also same for the banks. As a global bank, we operate in so many different jurisdictions that leads to tremendous complexity when it comes to what privacy is and how do we protect our own privacy, privacy of our clients, privacy of any counterparties that we interact. It's a complex ecosystem, right? So there will never, in my view, will be one answer to that question. And when it comes to choice then, to the other part of the question, I think there is a world where all the different DLT blockchain solutions can coexist, and it will need to always be a choice of an institution, a client, or any participant of the ecosystem to choose what is right for them. And that's kind of the approach that UBS is taking. We are exploring various use cases and various applications of the technology, being both on public Ethereum, but also looking at more private solutions and trying to figure it out what works best for us, for our clients, keeping obviously the privacy of the information very closely in mind.
Yeah, for us, it's more or less the same. So it's also about compliancy to regulations. So you don't want to be caught in such situations that you can be front run or back run. And it's for yourself as a bank not really nice if you get in such a situation, but it's also that the regulator, they don't like that things happen, that everything is exposed on chain. And especially if you look at individual clients, I work with a lot of data with retail clients. So if all their transaction, all their intents is publicly known, yeah, that's not good also for the protection of the client. So for example, you don't want to have client get range attacked because they did something on chain. So therefore, the option to have things private, that should always be possible. So pure public, that's a difficult case, I think, for banks, but there should be a modular option to have privacy.
So, a take on this. There were a lot of companies that believed that private blockchains are going to win because that's the only kind of blockchains that finance will adopt. Most of those companies are closed now because there was no adoption happening there. And I think part of this is because I don't think banks are looking for a better database. Databases are actually pretty good. So I think the important question is, why do banks and financial institutions even go on the blockchain? And there's probably a lot of answers, but like I think one of this is they actually want the blockchain, right? They actually want the things that they get from there, the ability to collaborate with other, maybe even banks in a permissionless manner, or in a not controlled manner by one of them, and maybe they want access to liquidity that doesn't necessarily exist on their specific ecosystem. Maybe they want cross-border access when they only operate on some locations, right? There's a lot of things. I think banks are, and again, traditional institutions in finance in general go on chain because they see value in it. And so I don't think they'll be segregated, but for some cases, they do need privacy. Right? For some situations, they do need more privacy than the blockchain gives right now. And I think a core question, which comes to also this, is like, is it a blockchain level privacy or is it an above blockchain level privacy? Because if your use case is just move money on the same chain, then maybe chain level privacy gives you the solution. But if your use case actually requires you to go between multiple chains, the privacy on the same chain doesn't help. Sometimes it's even like bad for you because it means once you bridge, you lose privacy. So like it can create a situation. What if the privacy layer on this blockchain is not compatible with the privacy layer on the other blockchain? So I think there's merit actually to do on top of blockchain privacy, like higher level privacy solutions as well. So, but I think it's an interesting space of design. The
EF is not a bank, but I've talked with quite a few banks in the $1 trillion security initiative. And I think one question is also, what is privacy? This is a definition that differs quite a lot between who you speak with. For some people, that means complete privacy with what you're doing, what kind of funds you have, etc. While for many institutions, that's not the type of privacy they're looking for, as in like complete privacy. But what they do need is the privacy, like you mentioned, for the customers and so forth, but still having the ability to understand what their customers is doing without actually displaying it to the public. And for that, I don't believe you need a complete privacy chain, basically. I think this is something that can be done with what we have here.
Yeah, I think Fredrik touched on an important point where we're talking about privacy. There's the bank's privacy towards other banks or other entities in general, where they want to keep maybe their, what they're doing internally, transaction-wise, private, and keeping the user's privacy and the user vis-a-vis the bank, like their interaction with the bank. And there's a lot of, you're right, there's a lot of ways to kind of think about privacy and what it means. And I think one of the more promising technologies that you hear a lot about in that regard is zero knowledge. So ZK proofs and using that to kind of like having that, maybe that happy middle ground where you can just kind of be private when you want to and not private when you don't. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how does ZK would play into this in the future.
Yeah, so for example, I would say with ZK, so instead of now you have a customer, he makes a connection with a third party, and then somewhere the data is obtained from all the customers, and the data is sort of stored in a centralized place. But if you use ZK, you can make use of selective disclosure. So you just ask him, is he above 18? Is he an accredited investor? And maybe he's a Dutch citizen. So only the least necessary information that's just possible to send without even storing the information in a centralized database.
I think at the end, this is, at least as a starting point, is going to be the most kind of powerful use case that you can then build on top, right? If I look at UBS working with across various tokenized securities and various distribution models, it's always a question. We want to enable the efficiency and peer-to-peer, but at the same time, we don't want to have access to all the information because it might not be desired from regulatory perspective. So we need to understand, to your point, the identity or certain suitability criteria of the client or an investor of a product without really revealing any of the identity of that. And this is a very powerful thing with, like, a solution would be with the zero knowledge proofs, and something that we're very strongly thinking about. But as obviously there's always a question like, is this just the one use case that we're solving for, or there is really something that can work at scale, right? And if we think about, I know, exchange of stable coins in a regulated marketplace in Switzerland, for example, and whether, rather than using a proper blacklisting or whitelisting approach, whether you can, at scale, use zero knowledge proofs. So we can, I think, first step is really to test it on single, very concrete cases, and in a second stage, think how to bring this at proper scale.
I wouldn't limit this to a ZK question. I think I would say there's like two kinds of privacy, at least in my basic thinking about it. There's like architectural privacy. Like, I have data, I'm just not sharing it with you. I'm just not saying it. Architecturally, I decide this data is here, this data is here. And there's cryptographic privacy.
When you say you mean the bank or the user or both?
Either or, general definition, right? And there's cryptographic privacy where there's like a bunch of like building blocks, right? There's like there's ZK, there's MPC, there's FHE, maybe obfuscation some days. So I think that we're going to see a lot of cryptographic privacy usage across all of the use cases, right? Like a lot of people are now waking up to, or not now, but like in the last couple of years, to ZK privacy. But like Fireblocks, we've been doing MPC privacy for a very long time, right? Like you have a wallet, there might be 50 people involved in the process of signing it, but you don't know any of that. You just see an ECDSA signature at the end. And the privacy is not protected via architecture, it's protected with like cryptography. And ZK gives you a different kind of cryptographic privacy. But like you would need to understand the alternative of these people signing and single ECDSA is like a multisig where you actually know there's 50 people signing. And you know maybe the rules that dictate who is signing each one of those transactions, right? So like this is something that like we believe in a meaningful way, is that giving that privacy to an institution is important. I think banks would have a very hard time adopting a process where their entire, like a technology where their entire process is visible on-chain to their competitors, to attackers, like, you know, so I think that's also a level of privacy. I think the discovery of cryptographic privacy is, like programmable cryptography in general, is a huge change in the world. And it's going to touch so many different things outside of blockchain too.
So, oh, sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say that speaking with these institutions, etc., they are showing a lot of interest in ZK privacy. They tend to have a hard time grasping the concept and kind of, like you say, it's having a hard time to deploy and to use it, etc. So something that's being done is that Etherealize is working to kind of kickstart this process and be able to provide these kind of, let's say, Lego blocks to institutions so that they can start enjoying privacy on-chain in an easy way, basically.
Can I just add something here? I think it's on one hand, the challenges of adoption within traditional financial institutions is one thing, right? But I think even if we push for the adoption from institutional side, there's always that regulatory oversight or dialogue that needs to happen, right? So there is, I would say, it's a tri-party discussion always. It's kind of, call it the crypto community, let's put it that way, categorize it for a second like this. There is a TradFi and there are regulators. And if there is a kind of a willingness to have such a tri-party discussion, maybe in the context of the ZK proofs, that's how this topic can really succeed, right? So it's not only about technology, but also acceptance of the regulators, which we just need to live with.
Yeah, you actually kind of like started to my next question, which was actually, I was gonna ask a little bit about the regulators themselves, because like you said, and you put it very, very nicely about the fact that it's like the trilemma, I would say, of like institutional adoption. Yes, obviously the crypto community is like all in on this. Banks are like, well, there's money to be made, so yeah, we like it. And regulators like pump your brakes, right? It's like always about that. So the question is like, for instance, do you think regulators actually want ZK proofs and all this privacy, or is too much privacy becomes like suspicious in their eyes at some point? Like we're kind of like, I think the crypto community obviously, and I think banks as well, are kind of trying to see maybe from the users, the individual's perspective, saying maybe he doesn't want to share this with the whole world. He can share it with us, that's fine, but not with the whole world. But maybe the regulator is a little bit like not happy too much with that. And I would say also there's a lot of other problems when you do decide, let's say bank A decides to adopt privacy in one manner, another bank decides to do it in another manner. And you can have situations like where like one jurisdiction demands transparency for AML and stuff like that, while another like mandates like more data minimization, like GDPR. So like those are like I think the challenges around privacy. So I'm kind of wondering like in terms of the regulation, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's indeed one of the biggest challenges right now. So it's also like, now I'm from the EU, so you think, okay, you have the micro regulation and it's for all the 27 countries, but within each jurisdiction, within each country, that's how they look at certain things. It's totally different. And some countries, some regulators, they have more understanding of certain areas, like for example ZK, fully homomorphic encryption, they understand it, but other ones, like for example the Dutch regulators, it depends. Some of them are still like, okay, what's this exactly? And they're still at the stage of, you know, the technology of 2017, for example. So they still think in that way. So it's all about education also from our side. And it's not also not only just the regulator, but also internally. So within banks, the people who understand this technology, that's less than 1%, I would say, at this moment.
Maybe I'll ask, like, who here wants complete privacy? Like, feels like they should have complete privacy? Okay, we have a few people. Who wants complete privacy for the terrorists planning an attack on their house? Okay, less people. Actually, none. Okay, so like, privacy is nuanced, right? Like there's topics that are not nuanced. There's rights that are not nuanced. And there's rights that are nuanced. And I think we need to understand that first of all, regulators definitely think at privacy as a nuanced thing. By the way, it's not like regulators hate privacy. Again, there's like regulators who actually push for privacy, but like it's definitely nuanced. It's definitely much more use case specific, and I think to some extent we all have choice. Each one of us chooses: do we build a technology that thinks about privacy as this given right, but understanding it will be used a lot for malicious actions, versus people who say, I want to build the kind of privacy technology that acknowledges that privacy has also like less desirable aspects and tries to build around that. I think there's a lot of promise in those places. And it's probably going to be a tug and pull between people that want more privacy and people that want full transparency, which, by the way, is helpful, you know, sunlight, you know, is great in that sense of being able to uncover what's happening in dark places. So I really see a lot of promise in those places where somebody designs, and it's like an innovation space, right? Like the regulators are not going to invent it. By the way, like for anybody who's thinking the regulator will come and invent the new way of doing privacy that's good, not going to happen. We need to invent it, and then we need to help the regulator understand why what we're inventing is actually good for people, good for humanity, good for their country and everything around it, so that they help us like make it happen.
Is that their consideration, really?
What do you mean?
Hopefully that's their consideration.
Yeah, like listen, I've talked to quite a few regulators. I'm not going to say each and every single one of them is perfect, but generally speaking, a lot of them are people that just want to like, you know, protect and make sure things work well. And a lot of them have been bruised by a lot of things that happened in the past. And so they're like not going to go through that again, you know? Like they make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's why it's like a hard work to get them to accept things. And it's hard because it should be hard. Sometimes it's too hard. And again, there are regulators that are not doing their job in the way they should be, right? But like when they are, they're basically sometimes slightly hard partners. But I think for this ecosystem to succeed in like, you know, to bring in the massive financial ecosystem into the blockchain, it's something somebody here has to do, right? Like some of the people here have to put effort into this. There's a lot of good people that put effort into improving regulation around cryptography, cryptocurrencies and cryptography. And lately there has been more success, right? That there's more success in getting them on our side.
Yeah, I just want to say that I do think that we need to think about privacy, but we should not take into consideration that, sure, it could be used by bad people if there is privacy. I think we should design it after the good people. For example, I am quite a strong proposer to chat control within the European Union, which, you know, the official intent is that, you know, this will prevent people from sending bad images, etc., over chat. But that also means that, you know, people who are not actually sending that will be affected by it. And I think to just take the bad people into account, I think we need to be very careful about that.
A lot was said, but just one thing, by coming back to the original question, I think regulators, from my experience, also talking to quite a bunch, they're not there yet. It's like I never heard a question about, I mean, maybe sporadically about zero knowledge proofs. It doesn't mean that they would not like the concept. It's basically the regulators will come very often with a problem, and it's up to call it the more broader market participants to identify what is really the root cause of that problem and what is the concern and help build a solution. Right? And it does, like, the regulators will not give us all the solutions. They will give us a framework, principles, potentially, if we're lucky. And all the industry participants have to work towards, like, educating the regulators, building solutions for that, and zero knowledge proof might be one of those in terms of privacy, might not. There are various others that maybe we'll touch upon. But that's why the dialogue needs to continue, and there is that educational element but needs obviously willingness from everyone, including banks, to participate in that dialogue.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We need to be much better when it comes to educating people. I think this is something that, now is being done with chat control. A lot of people are pushing back on it, which is awesome. It's not just a few people. It's many people in this ecosystem that are pushing back on it, and we need to be as good as explaining privacy so that we don't end up having that regulated as well.
Yeah. By the way, something cool that happened is that the United States regulators understood they actually have competition, right? And this is like a transition that happened in the last year. They were like, wait a sec, other regulations are allowing this. We're not allowing a lot of things. We're losing the market. And so like they also have some pressure there, right? Again, on some things, depends. But like they have some pressure there where, wait a sec, this is a very global ecosystem. And maybe if we're not facilitating it in a bad way, right? We're not facilitating the good parts of this ecosystem, we will just lose the ecosystem to others, like to their competitors. So I think that's also something good that's like playing on the ecosystem side. So like it's a very complex situation.
Yeah, I agree. My point was always when people would ask, like, years ago, what happens if everybody bans it, all the countries? And I always say it's like, there's this kind of like game theory in place where it's a pull and pull, and you're not going to have the whole world agreeing on something. They can agree on things that like we might all think that are good. Like, I don't know, things like around environment or nuclear weapons or whatever, things that are like very dangerous to us. So when it comes to money, I don't see like all nations agreeing on how we do stuff like that. So I was never really concerned about like everybody banning it all at once. Going back to like, this is less about the regulators, more about maybe the banks themselves. Do you see banks ever supporting full self-custody for the people, for the individuals? Is that because we're talking about trustlessness? Yeah, sorry, I'm pointing this at you guys because also because I know Fireblocks does, in a sense, self-custody, you would say, right? It's like not exactly self-custody because you can help them out with the MPC, but it's close to self-custody as possible, right? And like you can't take it without them if they don't. It's like you can help them. But I'm wondering if banks in the kind of like, if that's ever going to happen where users will have complete self-custody.
I don't know if it's going to be UBS position or my own view, but
yeah, personal positions. These are no official positions.
No, I know, joking a bit, but I think that at the end, this is one of the value propositions of, let's say, decentralized network, right? And self-custody, peer-to-peer exchange, it's at its core, right? So there will be a world where, I mean, the banks will need to accept this, that this is the reality. Whether they're going to support or find a way how to support their clients in self-custody, maybe, I don't know. But it's to one of the points that I was trying to make earlier, it's all about choice. And the banks will need to also enable that choice, whether they support it or they not, and they provide the custodial services for various range of digital assets. That's probably given. We do that already in UBS, and many other banks do that. But how to support properly more complex models with also the component of self-custody or full self-custody, I don't know when this will happen. It's also comes down to regulatory, various regulatory concerns around self-custody. But it, again, to another point, it should not preclude the industry, including banks, to think how this could really be enabled.
Yeah, I think there's also a usability problem here. Anybody who ever, dealt with a self-custodial wallet knows that if the user kind of loses their key, then they come to the bank and say like, hey, I lost my key, and they don't want to hear the bank saying something like, oh, I'm sorry, it's just like it's self-custody.
It's not our problem. It's you self-custody, right? No, but we have, in big scheme of things, and again, maybe not everyone thinks that, but banks at its core have also duty of care towards their client, and it's also regulatory driven. So in your case, how, if it's our client and the client decides to self-custody, how we can support them, on what level, so that things like, I lost my keys, I cannot access my assets, does not happen, right?
Like self-custody, first of all, it's a legal term, right? Like custody is a legal term, and we need to be, like we use it in this technical way when we talk about custody in the blockchain technology space. For banks, it's a legal liability. There's like a lot of things they need to do, a lot of definitions, how it has to work. So like, just want to acknowledge that for a second, that we're not exactly talking about the same thing. But like, if you mentioned, not like an official Fireblocks thing, but like my opinion, I actually think Fireblocks, this is one of the big roles that we play in the ecosystem. I think to some people, it was like they were thinking that banks will go from being custodians in traditional world to like being fully everything on chain, just like me trading on Uniswap. And what we believe in is that there's like this, a lot of gray in the middle, and also there's a lot of process. So like we shouldn't expect any serious institution to jump from 0 to 1. What we expect them, what I think will happen over time, is that different dynamics of the market, some of them internal desires, some of them is financial pressure, some of them is like maybe competitive pressure, will get them to adopt more and more of the on-chain technologies at their own pace. And maybe some banks are faster, some are slower, but like what I think is great about like our position in this ecosystem is that if you want to create a custodial wallet, right, to your users, so you're a bank and you have 1 million users, and if you want to create a custodial wallet for each one of them, and then at some point you want to create a non-custodial wallet for each one of them, it's like a couple parameters on an API. Right? You get the same infrastructure, you get the same process, you get a lot of the same stuff. So I would argue that it would be much easier for somebody that already starts to use the system in this way to slowly move towards things that are more, again, same for trading. You want to trade, you have an account on a centralized exchange, you want to trade on a decentralized exchange. It can be just a few parameters on an API call, right? So like that makes it much, much easier. Obviously, you have a lot of processes internally, but I think that's like, you know, I do see a role to play there, and I do see that there will be more and more adoption in some use cases, not in all of them. In some places, custodial wallets is just the best solution, and that's okay.
It comes to maybe the knowledge of the clients, right? I mean, as in the same way as when banks, let's say banks, sell financial products, they need to verify whether clients have specific knowledge and experience in dealing with certain products. Maybe in the same way, the banks will need to verify whether the client actually has knowledge and experience to a certain extent to call it self-custody. I know that it's like, it's not a legal term, right? Self-custody their assets. It's just out of the box, maybe. Not sure if that's going to ever happen, but maybe that's the way to go.
So instead of like an accredited investor, like a responsible key holder or something like that. So before we wrap up, because we only have a few minutes left and there might be questions from the audience, I just want to kind of like in the nature of this conference, which is trustless, I'm also wondering, like, I assume it's important for institutions that the infrastructure at the lowest level, i.e. Ethereum probably, that seems to be the case, remains as trustless as possible. What would be a deal breaker for you guys if suddenly like this happened on Ethereum in terms of like, okay, we can't use this chain anymore as like the substrate of the financial rails?
I think something like a full rollback of the state that, yeah, at this stage of the maturity of the chain, yeah, that means it's not really trustless. So that's a real deal breaker.
Okay, anyone else?
I mean, it's to a bit that point. I think what we're also looking at is basically to understand the whole, like across various levels, what is the kind of the governance setup of a blockchain? What are the kind of centralization vectors or decentralization vectors, and also trying to find a bit of the sweet spot. So a bit to that point is basically would not accept maybe too much centralization and then someone taking a decision, maybe not in context of Ethereum specifically, but other blockchains to make certain changes state of the blockchain that would influence us or our clients. There's the other spectrum of full decentralization, what it means, right? Maybe on a different point to make, I think we would never accept not to be able to make choices how we protect data, how we interact with the blockchain, right? if that's taken, that like you lose that trustlessness and flexibility, and that would not kind of be the desired, right? So we still want to choose kind of maybe with whom we want to interact on the blockchain, even though on that foundational layer, it's open, permissionless, but then being bound by specific risk appetite, jurisdictional requirements, we want to make a choice with whom and how we interact on that permissionless layer.
All right. Do we have any questions? No, we don't have time? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think this was very insightful into like where we can go from here in terms of on-chain adoption in institutions. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.